Hello everyone. So today I'll be taking a small workshop on reverse engineering and malware analysis. Okay, so I'm Vivek Parekh. I'm working with CyberRange as a software developer, and I have some experience with reverse engineering malware analysis. And this session is to get you familiar with how reverse engineers use the tool to perform effective static and dynamic analysis on the malware. Okay, like, how do you, if you know that if the machine you are analyzing is actually infected, okay, then what key fact? I'm not audible. Okay, just a sec.
Vivek, your volume is slightly low today.
Is it better now?
Yeah, better.
Okay. Yeah. So just give me a minute. Sorry, just give me a few minutes. Yeah. So what I was saying is, let's say you are trying to analyze.
Vivek, are you there? We can't hear you.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah, you started, but again, your audio had gone off.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So what I was saying is, if you are actually trying to analyze a machine that you think is infected, so what you do is you try to observe some odd behaviors. Okay, let's say you're seeing that too much memory is being consumed, or some random files are getting deleted or encrypted. Okay, so to begin to understand what's happening to a system, you need to get hands-on. Okay, so you need to first of all prepare a VM and necessary tools to perform a full-scale analysis of the executable. Okay, so for that, reverse engineering is a must. Okay, so what's reverse engineering basically is? It's the understanding the inner workings of a system or deriving its blueprints from its function sample. Okay, so reverse engineering is all about whenever you don't have access to the source code, and you're trying to understand that how the system is behaving. You want to know the functionality. Okay, so that's when you use reverse engineering. So it's basically getting an inner view and inner details. It could be anything. It could be a software reverse engineering. It could be hardware reverse engineering. Okay, so getting the blueprint. But what we are concerning with malware analysis generally is software reverse engineering. Yeah, exactly. It's figuring out the recipe from code. That's correct. So what's the motivation for reverse engineering? We have malware analysis, vulnerability research, software protection, program analysis. So in malware analysis, generally antivirus authors, what they do is to analyze some malware, they try to employ reverse engineering because obviously they don't have the source code for the malware and they need their antivirus to detect that malware. So they use reverse engineering for that purpose. Some IDS, IPS softwares like Snort, intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system, they use reverse engineering to figure out any attacks that are coming on the system. In vulnerability research, it is used for exploit development, vulnerability or patch analysis. Okay, in software analysis, it's used to test the strength of a software. Okay, so let's say you don't want other people to reverse engineer your own software, so you employ some additional anti-reverse engineering techniques and you perform strength analysis. And finally, there is reverse engineering used in program analysis. So what's the basic approach that is taken always is to getting some disturbance here.
Request participants to mute your mics, please. Prashant, can I request you to mute your mic, please?
Okay, so
Vivek, continue.
the basic approach in reverse engine is first of all, you have the objective definition. Okay, so what's your objective? Why you're reversing anything? Any software, why you're reversing that? Then you need to identify the technology behind it. Okay, that how it is actually coded. So what software was used or what compiler was used in the compilation of the software. Then you need to perform dynamic and static analysis. Okay, and then finally you need to do validation that whatever your reverse engine is correct. So we come to types of malwares. So malwares are all these boxes you are seeing, they are types of malware. So malware is a just broad category. It encapsulates viruses, exploit kits, trojans, worms, mobile malwares, IoT, ransomware, and rootkits. Okay, so what's the malware initial infection vector? So you need to find out that how did the malware initially get on the system. So initial infection vector can be anything. Let's say you attached a USB device, or you visited a web page and you came across some malicious JavaScript, or there was an SQL injection attack, or there was some spear phishing or in an email attachment. So what generally happens is some organizations, they are targeted by customized spear phishing attacks that use internal knowledge. Generally, the mail would be from a known person. Okay, so they'll try to masquerade as a known person in your organization, and they try to send you some targeted attacks. So generally, what would happen is they would send you some Microsoft Office document. Okay, and then in that document there would be some macro. So on execution of that macro, you might get infected. Okay, so what's the traditional malware infection chain? There's always a point of entry. Okay, it could be a malicious attachment, it could be a malicious website, or an exploit, or USB. Okay, though, so what happens in these cases is a certain file gets written to the disk. Anything you downloaded might get written to the disk, and then the file can be scanned by an antivirus. Yes, email with embedded malware. That's right. So the file can be scanned by antivirus program, and the payload could be delivered onto your system. So that's the traditional malware infection chain. Okay, to set up the analysis environment, what you generally do is you need to have a virtual machine. Generally, people use Windows 10, and you need to have your network isolated. okay, then you need to install some common tools. So you must be knowing about apt, which is a package manager for Ubuntu and Debian. Similarly, we have Chocolatey for Windows. So this is like this helps us in quickly installing some common analysis tools. Okay, then you need to learn to capture network traffic from a Windows 10 virtual machine. So before we begin the analysis of a malware, so we need to know that what's the common execution standard for the binaries. So for Windows, we have portable executable format. And for Linux, we have ELF format, which is executable and linkable format. Okay, so why study them? So we need to know that knowledge about them is essential for statically analyzing closed source binaries, example malwares. Also, when performing dynamic analysis, what happens is you need to run the malicious program under a debugger. Okay, so debugger is one that allows you to debug your software by running it. In case of malware analysis, the analysts generally use a debugger to perform dynamic analysis. Okay, so in that case, understanding the file headers helps in overcoming problems occurring during debugging. Okay, so we generally will focus on portable executable format because it is on Windows. It caters to Windows, and ELF is it's on Linux, but generally like right now we will be studying about Windows. Okay, so portable executable format is a file format for executables, object codes, DLLs, both in 32-bit and 64-bit systems. Okay, so the PE format, it's a data structure that encapsulates the information necessary for the Windows loader. Okay, so Windows OS loader needs to study the PE format. Okay, and it tries to see that, okay, how to load this particular file. So whenever you double click an exe, what happens is the Windows OS loader, which is present in the Windows operating system, it tries to parse that particular file and then it tries to run that file. Okay. So the PE file can include the dynamic library references for linking, API export, import tables, resources, and TLS. So all these are present in the PE file. Okay, so P header structure. So what the P header looks like, there is always an MZ header. Okay, DOS header. So MZ header is a magic number. So every file, in order to be identified, always has a magic number. Okay, for Java it's something else. For Linux files it's something else, and for Windows exes it's something. So for Windows exe, we use MZ header to identify that, okay, this file is a PE file, this file is an executable, and it is good to be executed on Windows system. Okay, then we have the DOS stub. Then there is a PE file header. So file header has the signature, and it contains some necessary sections, some relative addresses to some other sections. Okay, then there is image optional header. Okay, which stores the it's just named optional header, but it's not really optional. It stores important information about the executables like the entry point. Okay, then there is section table, and then there are finally sections. Okay, so sections in a P executable in an exe or a DLL can be .code section, .text section. So this always contains your executable code. Okay, nothing else. Then there is .data section, which contains the variables. Okay, so whenever you have compiled a C program, there were some variables, right? So if you compile the C program on Windows system, then you'll find out that .data section always contains those variables. Then there are some other sections, .rdata, then there is idata. So idata is about the import table. So if you try to execute, if your program tries to execute certain library functions like printf, scanf, or some Windows API function like create process. So all those, the information about them is stored in the import table. So import table tells us that, okay, which functions or which additional libraries this program is requiring is invoked. Okay, then there is .edata, which is export data, which is used for DLLs, and then there is resource section. So resource section, whenever you find a GUI, so the whatever the visual representation of that GUI is there, right, in an executable, that is stored in the resource section. So this is what it looks like. There is DOS header. The entry header contains the file header, optional header, and data directories. Then there are section headers, and then finally sections themselves. Okay. So P header, it contains the information the OS requires to run the executable. Okay. So this information is useful because it tells us that okay, how the malware is functioning, how the malware is interacting with the OS, what functions malware is calling. Okay, so why is this studying this header important? Because obviously, first of all, it contains all the necessary information that is present in the malware. Okay, it contains the information that specify where the executable needs to be loaded in memory. It tells us what's the entry point of the executable. Okay, it contains information that specifies where the execution begins. Then it contains the additional libraries that are loaded by the executable. Okay, for analyzing the P header, what information we are basically interested in is a compiler timestamp. Then there are some sections. So you need to find out that is executable packed. Packing, I'll just explain a bit later. And then are there any inconsistent permissions? Then what libraries the executable is importing? What strings are present in the binary? Okay. So one popular tool is PE Studio or PE it's useful for analyzing PE files. Okay. Let me just show you the demo of PBR and PE Studio. So PBR is used to parse any PE file. So we'll just load some PE file. Let's say we loaded this PE file. So this is what the PE file looks like when we open it with a with PBR. So as I explained, there's DOS header, then there is NT header containing the signature file header and optional header. Okay, then there are sectional headers. Then finally there are sections. So it tells us that this is the entry point. Then there is .r data, dot data. Okay, so you can see that there are some imports here as well. Okay, what imports, which functions the malware is calling. Okay, for example, you can see that there's win.inet.dll. This library contains all these functions. Okay, internet open URL, internet close URL. So you can just get a basic idea. Okay, this malware is trying to interact with the network. It's trying to download some file, or it's trying to visit any URL. Okay, so you can just gather all these, get a basic idea that what malware is actually doing. Similarly, we can use PE Studio, another tool. Just a sec. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to start this Windows 10 VM. Okay, I need to show you what a binary is like PE Studio. So what I'll quickly do is I'll just download the PE Studio. Okay, and then we'll start it, and we'll open any exe with it. Okay, so I've downloaded eStudio. Just try to open it, and we'll open any file with it that we find as it seems suspicious. So here I open this particular file. Okay, so you are seeing that it's showing you all this information. It's showing you. Okay, so you're seeing it as indicators. Then there is a virus total analysis. Then it's showing you various headers of that file. It's showing you libraries, imports, and there are several strings as well. Okay, so indicators, you can see that it's the file is scored by virus total. So if the score is 4168, which is quite a negative score, so it's this file is probably a malware. Okay, just a word of warning: don't try to analyze such files in your host operating system. Always use a VM for analysis, because you never know that you might accidentally double click the file. So we don't want that to happen. Always use a VM. Then it shows that this file references a URL pattern. In this case, it's trying to go to practicalmalwareanalysis.com cc.htm. Okay, then the checksum is invalid. Okay, so you can see the virus total score here. You can see that most of the viruses, antiviruses, are trying to detect this file as a virus. Then there are some sections are there. Then it's showing you the libraries that is trying to import here. Okay, all the imports this all the this particular binary is trying to execute. Then there are strings as well. So in this, you can see the string practicalmalanalysis.com. Okay, so you can quickly see if we. So it says that success internet connection. This is what happens when you try to run the binary. So it's trying to actually connect to this practicalmalanalysis.com. Okay, so this was the demo of Studio and PBear. So this is what the file looks like whenever it is open in Studio. Now we come on to x86 architecture and assembly. So assembly language is very much essential when you're trying to reverse engineering a malware. In that case, you need to be familiar with x86 architecture primarily. So in x86 architecture, there are registers, stack, and CPU privilege modes. So it was originally designed by Intel in 1978. It's based on CISC, which is complex instruction set computer. There is also RISC, which is a reduced instruction set computer. So that is usually used by ARM operating system, by ARM architecture. Okay, so it's useful for multitasking. Then there is a protected memory model. There is paging and segmentation, and we can use it on 16-bit, 32-bit, and 64-bit. So in the MS-DOS era, generally the computers were 16-bit. Generally now what we are seeing is 64-bit Windows 10 operating systems. So these are the registers in the assembly language. We have EX, EBX, ECX all the way till ESP and EDP. Then there are segment registers. We have your instruction pointer register. So EIP, you need to be familiar that EIP always points to whatever the current instruction is executing. So EIP will always point to that. Okay. Then there are control registers as well. So in general purpose registers, EX is generally an accumulator register. It's used for storing operands and result data. Then there is EBX, ECX. ECX is used for generally loop operations. So if you must have executed any loop in your C program, if you have executed any loop in your C program, you must you try to analyze it in assembly. You will see that it's using ECX register. Then we have EDX register, there's ESI and EDI, and then there's ESP, EBP. So ESP is a stack pointer register, and EBP is a stack data pointer register. So the stack pointer register always points to the top of the stack. Okay, whatever data is at the top of the stack, ESP always points to that data. So the x86 registers. So basically EX, EBX, these are 32-bit registers and their counterparts are RAX, RBX, RCX. So these are 64-bit registers. So whenever your OS is a 64-bit, you have 64-bit machine. So you'll see that it generally uses RAX and RBX registers. So EX, EBX are used for 32-bit programs and 32-bit architecture. Okay, so these are the privilege protection levels. So what happens is your kernel is always in ring 0 and ring 3 is your applications. Okay, so whatever applications are there, they'll run in ring 3 mode. So ring 3 mode, it's the least privilege, and the kernel, which is ring 0, is most privileged. Okay, so kernel has all the power you can see, and ring 3 does not have so much of power. So your general user applications, they are running in ring 3. Then the device drivers, they either run in ring 1 and ring 2, and some also run in ring 0. Okay, so common instruction, multiple instances of registers. Like, what do you mean? There are multiple instances of registers like EIP. No, basically EIP is just one register. Okay, there might be some registers like EIP, but the register which always points to the currently executing instruction is the EIP. Okay, so single register, EIP or RIP in 64. Okay, so common instructions in assembly language are push, pop. They are used for stack operations. Then you have move, LEA, which are used for to move any data to or from memory or registers. Okay, then there is call, return, and jump instruction. So call instruction is used whenever you try to call a function. So let's say you have a function, let's say add. We are adding two numbers. So whenever that add function is called in the background, what happens is CPU will insert a call instruction there. So whenever it sees the call instruction, it will try to execute that add function. Then some additional instructions are there, are not really important. Okay, so this is what a call stack looks like. Okay, we have on the left, we have the stack. There is stack base and stack top. Okay, so stack top is always pointed to by the ESP register, and EBP points to the function frame. Okay, so whatever the length is there, right? The length of the function, EBP always points to the bottom of that. So on the right, we have some assembly instructions. So we have push 00, push FF. So what they'll do is they push 00 will push 0 on the stack. Then we have push FF, which will push 0x FF, which is 255 on the stack. Then sub function will be called. So in that sub function, what you have is push EBP, move EBP, ESP. So whenever a function is called, right? So the return address is the one that's immediately next to the function. Okay, so that return address is also pushed on the stack because the CPU wants to know that after we execute this function, where to return to. Okay, so for returning back, a return address is always pushed on the stack. Okay, so this is what the program layout in memory looks like. So we have your stack, and there is heap. There is uninitialized data and initialized data. That is dot data. then there is .text, which is your executable code. Okay. I'll just show you a demo of using GDP on Linux and x64DBG on Windows. Okay, so I have a Debian system which is running. I'll just try to SSH into it. Yeah, I'm already inside this system. So we have very simple program, add.c. For buffer overflow, yeah, for buffer overflow, what happens is, whatever value. So for buffer overflow, what happens is whatever there is some return address. Okay, it's not really important malware analysis theory, but I'll just tell you what happens is the return address on the stack gets overwritten. Okay, by any value that you that is input to the program. Okay, so if that value is large enough, the return address will get overwritten. And what happens is instead of returning to the return address, the program actually returns to some attacker controlled memory area. So this is what happens in buffer. Okay, so we return back to our add.c program. So it's just it's doing nothing. It's simply entering two integers, calculating the sum. Okay, so we'll just try to run this. So we get our output. Okay, now let's try to see what happens is when we start this program with GDB. So GDB is a very common, only good debugger on Linux systems. So we try to start this program, and this is what happens. So here we have the program source code. And as I told you, right, ESP always points to the top of the stack, and EBP is the frame pointer. Okay, so it's pointing to the function base. Then here you have your disassembly. All the assembly instructions are there. You can see there is a call. Okay, call, as I explained, whenever you try to invoke a function, the call instruction would be invoked by the CPU, and then CPU calls that particular function. So in this case, CPU, when it sees call printf at the rate TLD, so it will call that printf function. Okay. Try to see the registers also. You can see that there are several registers that I told you. Since it's a 32-bit program, so you are seeing all the 32-bit registers here from EX till EIP. EIP, as you can see, is always pointing to the currently executing instruction. So this it's pointing to sub ESP 0xC. So it means that this particular instruction is yet to be executed by the CPU. Okay. Now the interesting thing, when you try to find the program memory, so how the process looks like in the memory. So this is what a process looks like. In the very beginning, we have our own program. Okay, it has several sections, as I told you. It has your executable section, then it has your data section. Okay, then there are several libraries that are imported by this program. So because this program is using printf function, it's invoking the libc, library C function. Okay, and there is your ld.so. Okay, then there is stack. The same can be done if you try to analyze it using common Linux built-in tools. Okay, so what we'll do is ld.so is your Linux loader. So every program generally uses ld.so whenever it is loading in the memory. So ld.so is responsible for actually loading the program. That's what this is for. Okay, so let's try to find out what's the PID of our add program. Okay, so what we do is cat proc 5195 and maps. So it shows us the same layout. Okay, so this program, it's showing us the same layout, that how this program looks like in the memory. Yeah. That was the Linux demo. Now I'll just go to the Windows demo x64DB. So I'll just open a Windows 7 VM and I'll show you what a program looks like when we open it under a debugger on Windows system, and what the process memory looks like. So I opened this debugger, X32DBG debugger. For 64-bit, it's called X64DB. So I'll just open any file with it. Okay. And whenever we start the program, you can see that it's tells us the module is lab603.exe, the name of the program, and entry point, right? So this entry point, it's specified in the P header. Okay, this entry point is where the program actually starts executing. Here also you can see there is a call instruction. It's trying to call get version function. And on the right side, you are seeing all the registers. There is EIT register, which, as I said, is always pointing to the currently executing instruction. Okay, so this is your lab entry point, and EIT is pointing to it. And then here we have the stack. Okay, so stack, as I said, ESP is always pointing. So this is your ESP, and it is always pointing to the top of the stack. And then we have your memory dump here. And also in this case, when you try to see the memory map, you can see this is what a Windows program looks like in memory. Okay, so you are seeing that there is text lab60.exe, then there's .text section, .rdata section, .data section, and then there are several DLLs that are loaded by the program. There's kernel base.dll, msvcrt.dll. So msvcrt is where a printf function is called. So in Linux we had libc.so. In Windows we have msvcrt.dll. Okay, different operating systems, different DLL. So that's what a program when open under a debugger looks like. Okay, so this was the demo, the GDB proc and X64DBG demo. As I told you, this is what a program looks like in GDB. And then there is process address space. The memory map that I showed you, right? That's what it is, the process address space. So every process is laid out in the same virtual memory space, regardless of actual physical memory location. So every process feels like that it is the only process executing the system, and it enjoys all the memory. So it sees that, okay, all the memory in the computer is visible to it, but what happens in reality is it is actually executing a virtual memory space. It's not physical memory space, it's a virtual memory space. So that virtual memory space is then translated to physical memory space by the CPU. Okay, so OS and CPU together, they help maintain this abstraction. So every process feels like it is the only process that is executing on the system. So this is what a 32-bit program layout looks like in memory, as I told you earlier. So now we come on to packers. So malwares generally, in order to escape from antiviruses, they use a packing software. So packing has their genuine uses as well. For example, people use UPX to pack a binary, but it is also used by malware authors to compress their binary. Then it can be they can be using VM Protect. Then for obfuscating, there is crypto.com. So you can see that every type of packer has its own uses and purposes. So malware authors, what they generally do is their goal is to first of all hinder any analysis performed by the antivirus engineer to reduce the size of the binary. So they use these packers to do that. So what packed executables are? So packers compress or encrypt the executables. Malware authors often protect executables with packers to make it difficult to analyze by the malware authors, antivirus engineers, and it's of smaller size. So what happens is the binary is unpacked in memory at runtime. So this is what a packer structure looks like. And there is this P header section header, image section is there. This is the original file before packing. So after packing, what happens is this image section is compressed to a packed section, and then there is unpacking section, which is so you can see the entry point is also changed. In the left side, the entry point was in the image section, but on the right side, the entry point is where the unpacking section begins. So this unpacking section is responsible for unpacking the packed section. So this is what happens. First of all, from P header, the entry point is calculated. So the Windows OS, it tries to load this program. It will come to the unpacking section. So unpacking section is responsible for taking the packed section and unpacking it in memory. This is what happens. So after unpacking, what happens is the packed section is replaced by unpacked section. All this happens in memory. Okay, so the file is not stored on the disk. So unpacked executable file. This is what it looks like. Okay, packing and pack process you wanted to do. Just a moment. Okay, so I told you why people try to use packers or cryptors. Okay, they want to encrypt their binary, they want to compress their binary, they want the binary to be made difficult for the antivirus engineer to analyze. Okay, and then there is another use, that is licensing and enforcement. So some people also in the software industry, if they don't want their software to get analyzed by some reverse engineers, they use some license enforcement like Canada. But for malware, what's important is the important factors are UPX, VM protect. Okay, so UPS is used for compressing the executable. Compressing means reducing the size of the executable. VM protect is used to protect the executable from analysis. Okay, because you don't want the antivirus engineers analyzing your malware. Okay, what happens if they analyze your malware? They'll try to develop some signatures, and then your virus, your malware will get detected by the antivirus. We don't want that to happen, right? So that's why you use packers. So packers, they compress the executable, encrypt the executable. Okay, so as I told you, the why they protect the executables. Okay, so the unpacking always happens in memory at runtime. Okay, unpacking does never happens on the disk. So even if you start a program and then you stop it, you will see that the packed program remains on the disk. Okay, so there is no unpacked program in memory. So packer structure, what it looks like, there is P header. P header always in the original file. P header always points to the entry point, which is lies in somewhere in the image section. Okay, but after packing, what happens is the entry point of the executable is changed to the unpacking section. Okay, this unpacking section, what it does is it takes the pack section, okay, and it does the unpacking. So your final result is your unpacked section, okay, in the memory, and then after the unpacking happens, the unpacked section is ran. Okay, the unpacked section is ran in the memory itself. Yeah, so the functional components of a packer, there is always an encryption or encoding algorithm. There is this decryption engine which is which is used for when you want to decrypt the executable. Then there is protection engine. So protection engine, why it's used? Because you want your code to be more obfuscated. You don't want any one to use the debugger to analyze your code. You don't want it running in a VM. Okay, so anti-decompilation. So all these are protection strategies that are used. They are quite advanced, but they are used by the malware authors. Okay. So some examples of packer scripters are UPX, ASPAC, then there's Armadillo, Famida, PM Protect. Okay, so I'll just try to show you what happens when an executable is tagged with the UPX software. So I have with me your so I have with me this binary is there, okay, which is named compress me. So what we'll do is we'll use UPX to analyze this binary, to compress this binary. Okay, so UPX I've already installed using this tool called Chocolatey. Okay, you can use this tool to install any uh, software which you want. Okay, so what I do is I have installed UPX. I try to run this UPX tool. Okay, so it tells us that it's named Ultimate Packer for Executables. Okay, now what we do is we try to use UPX to compress a binary. So we'll just take this binary, compress me.txt. Just note one thing, current size is 40 KB, right? Windows 7, I cannot zoom it further actually. Yeah, just a sec. I'll just try to see what I can do. Let me try to see if I can try to use PowerShell to execute UPX. Okay, I guess this is better now. So this is the tool that we have. Okay. What just try to understand that, okay, the current size is 40 KB. Okay. Go to properties, you see that size is 40 KB. Okay, now after this file is tagged with UPX, just see what happens. So what you do is you use UPX, and then the name of the lab, which is lab62 compress.me.exe. Okay, and just see the change in size. So what it says that UPX has executed on this file. The compression ratio is 40%. Okay, so file size was reduced from 40,960 bytes to only 16 bytes or 16 kilobytes. Okay, so you can see here, you go to properties, you can see it's only 16 KB. So you can see that, okay, this file has been compressed now. Now, when you try to open this particular binary in, let's say, PE Studio, and then you try to see that, okay, you can see that there is no practical malware analysis. Any string, you don't find it here. And there are some imports. You can see that all the imports have vanished from it. Okay, in contrast, if you try to load the original file in PE Studio, what will happen is you'll see that there are several other functions that are called by the binary. So this is the original file. If I try to load it in PE Studio, you can see that I can see some strings. Okay, I can see some strings are loaded here. Okay, then I can see that some imports are here. Okay, but all those imports and everything, they vanished when we open the compressed file under a PE analyzer. Okay, Okay, for uncompressing, all you need to do is you just need to run it in reverse way. So upx-d and whatever file you compressed, right? So you can see that it's again changed the size to 40 KB. So for UPX, this was easy because UPX is very popular packing tool. So it offers its own unpacking functionality. But for malwares, you will find that not all malwares are able to be unpacked. Okay, in that case, you need to open the malware in a debugger and perform manual unpacking. Okay, so that's another advanced topic. So malware authors generally, malware reversers, they generally, unpack the binary in the memory and then they dump the binary to the memory to the disk. Okay, so this was all for the UPX demo. So there are some online antivirus and sandbox tools as well. The most popular is your VirusTotal. Okay, uh, can you use RAM dump to do the same? Yes, so after the unpacking has happened in the memory, you can use some external tools as well to dump the binary to this. But then there are some other advanced things like you need to fix the import table of the binary before it's dumped to the disk so that it can run properly. Okay. This is just a file that analysis of lab 6.2 in Cuckoo Sandbox. So this is an online Cuckoo Sandbox. So what I've done earlier is I had submitted this file for analysis on this particular website. So Cuckoo Sandbox generally does some static and dynamic analysis on the memory. So you can see that this particular URL was there in the binary and it tried to maybe open this URL. Okay. Then there are some other static analysis is also there. Okay, so you can see that what all imports the binary is having, what all DLLs this is calling. So in this case, it's calling kernel30.dll and win9n.dll. Okay, and then there are several analyses. Let's share the link with you. This is just a video that I had made. How you can also, install your own VirusTotal desktop app and perform the analysis yourself. Recording, I'll just coordinate with my teammate within there and I'll let you know how it can be made available. So this is VT Uploader. This is just a desktop tool which is used for analyzing any binary. You just install it. After installing, what you do is you go to a folder where executables are present and you can select all of them and simply send to VirusTotal. As easy as that. What it does, it opens all the binaries which were which were detected by antiviruses. So it will open the browser and you'll be able to see all the analysis here. Okay, so you can see that these many 40 antiviruses detected this file. Okay, so that was it for this workshop. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll coordinate with within that how this slide can be made available. Okay. Uh, Open source. This is a freeware. Okay, this VirusTotal app is a freeware. It's not open source. It's a freeware. Okay, so I guess this will be all. Thank you so much. where I can download reports. Yeah, PDF and recording. This will be made available once I already available. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.